Thank you for participating in the 9th Annual BlackStar Film Festival. We would like to thank our funders and individual donors, as well as our network of producing and community partners. This panel is supported in part by Leeway Foundation. The runtime for this panel is 60 minutes. Please follow us on all social media platforms at BlackStarFest and use the hashtags BSFF20 and BlackStar20SoLit. We hope you have a wonderful time during the 2020 BlackStar Film Festival.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this special conversation between two incredible artists. I'm Denise Speak, board co-chair for BlackStar, and it is my absolute pleasure to briefly introduce the folks participating in this conversation. Heidi Saman was named one of Filmmaker Magazine's 25 New Faces to Watch. Her first feature film, Namour, was acquired by Ava DuVernay's Array and won the LA Muse Jury Award at the 2016 Los Angeles Film Festival. In 2008, Saman's short film, The Maid, Il Shagala, premiered in competition at the Cannes Film Festival. She is a 2016-2018 Pew Fellow in the Arts and recently directed an episode of OWN's Queen Sugar. Heidi is developing her second feature film, The Armenian Club, with Sundance Institute's Film 2 initiative. By day, she's a producer for National Public Radio's Fresh Air with Terry Gross. With the rare ability to captivate audiences with her sincere storytelling and global perspective, Lulu Wang continues to establish herself as a writer and filmmaker to watch. Most recently, Wang released her second feature, The Farewell, which she both wrote and directed. The story follows Billy, deftly portrayed by Awkwafina, who returns to China after decades in America to join a household of relatives as they convene to say goodbye to the family's elderly matriarch under the pretense of a shotgun wedding. Thank you, Heidi. Thank you, Lulu, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Me too.
Hello.
Hi. It's nice to talk to you again.
Hi. Always
and
great
see
to
you.
talk to you. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know when we first talked, it was the beginning of this quarantine, and I was in lockdown. I believe you were too. It does feel like a million years ago, and that was actually what I wanted to ask you about. Like, I felt like we were in the exciting time of the lockdown, if that's like a horrible way to put it. But now we're sort of in our lives right now, and I'm just wondering, like, how you're feeling at this point, like how it's feeling for you now.
It's hard, I mean, it's I think back, there's no way in March, if anybody told me that we would still be in it in September of this year and potentially seeing numbers that are even worse than the first wave. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And it's really disheartening and it's sad just to see the way our country's dealing with it, and I just think there's this really combative, tough energy right now. And it's difficult to be creative in this environment. In many ways, it seems like there's no end. And it's like none of us can control when this thing will end, when we can return to normal. So really tough, especially for control freaks, and like, I don't know how you feel, but
Yes. Oh, absolutely. And like creatively, has it been difficult? You said that it's been hard, but I mean, there's always writing, but have you been doing that, or are you anticipating returning to working on projects soon, or?
we're trying. I just finished writing a series that I was working on called Expats for Amazon. So I've been productive only because I have to be. I have such a sense of like obligation when I, commit to a project. I have to finish it, and it doesn't matter come hell or high water, right? The show must go on in a way. And so if I didn't have those deadlines, I don't think that I would be as productive. But now I'm switching to another project that I've also committed to. And that's hard. It's hard to like push a boulder up a hill by yourself in a way. Like I've obviously been working with my producers and writers, but we're all separate and the energy is different. So once you push that boulder up the hill, there's no relief because there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to celebrate. We're not together. And it's like, all right, next thing, and I'm trying to learn to celebrate the moments. That's something I didn't grow up doing. And it's really hard in the pandemic to celebrate the moments. The cocktail, like that, we do that every day anyways. Like, it's just, yeah, I don't know.
I
Are
totally
you
know.
having
I think
a difficult time being?
I am. I think what you're talking about is something I've definitely been experiencing, which is just like the rhythms of little things that you look forward to in the day are no longer there. I used to stop by the coffee shop and sort of talk to this, to the people who work there and have that lovely little conversation and then move on with my day. And even, I'm working remotely, I'm a producer at Fresh Air, and I'm finding that the adrenaline rush of getting the show on the air, like that's gone because we're planning so far ahead in advance. So that little kick I get from like, oh my God, the show's going live, we're ready to go and it's happening. Like that's just gone. Like we prep the show very early and our cuts and edits are really made. And then I ship it out to our producer who then, our executive producer who puts it on the air. And it's just a different way of the collective excitement, just the social stuff. I'm just missing that. And I don't have that at all. And I'm an introvert and I kind of like my own time, but this is different. This
Same,
isn't
yeah.
like
Yeah.
indulgent at all, you know?
Well, because it's forced
Um,
upon you rather than self-selected, it's not like you're choosing to be isolated, you know.
yeah.
Uh, and I'm curious how it's been doing having to juggle multiple things, right? Like you still have to continue with your day job of producing this show. Um, and then how do you balance that with writing? And are you able to?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the critical thing is we are fortunate, my husband and I, to work from home, and then we also have like a 1-year-old. And so our childcare immediately just went away. Now we're splitting it between us. So like any sense of boundaries between like my work life and my home life are just gone. And so we are really relying on each other in ways that are it's just new. It's new for us in our relationship. And we're getting tons of time with him. It's a weirdly perfect age to be, 1-year-old during a pandemic because he doesn't have school and those demands are pretty, like he just needs care. And so we have, people who've been helpful and who are sort of following the same rules as us. So we're making it work, but writing is essential for me. Like I was like one of my big fears when I became a parent was like, when am I going to be able to write? And it's fun. It's funny. Like I still make time for it. I really do. I set like a timer and I play some music and I just go. And I just have to be more rigid about it now. But it does happen, and I'm grateful that it's still happening. But like everyone else, it's just it's like I work late now. There's no like leaving work. It's all one big mess. Of like I have a meeting right now. Can you watch him while I go do this? But one thing
Yeah.
I was wondering about, like when we last spoke, we talked about how like this kind of generational difference of like our parents maybe not wanting to talk about racism and race in the way that our generation does. And something that I found during this time, with the protests for Black Lives Matter and George Floyd is that like my mom, who is kind of quiet about these things, has not been quiet. Like she's really been reflecting on like her work experiences and really thinking about race in this country. And I wondered if that had happened for you at all, or if you've seen any kind of change in how they're kind of processing what this time has been?
Yes and no. I think that, my mom and I have definitely had conversations about it. But I think my parents are dealing with something much bigger, which in a way, it's like there's so many things, so many ways the country is changing, that my life is changing, that I'm moving further and further away from them. And so that includes the way that we think about race and gender and identity and being American in this country, and what that means when you're an immigrant, and when, you're black or brown, and how it's our experiences are different, in the way that we really analyze it. Um, they're not used to that. They're really used to, as we talked about before, not only not talking about it, but intentionally saying, don't pay attention to that, because you can't change those things. Anything that's sort of like you can't change, why focus on it? And so even though we continue to have conversations, I think they just get so frustrated because it feels so outside of how they were brought up to think. And I think they feel distance from it, and I think it triggers a lot of fear for them, and so then they get defensive. And so it's been tricky to have a lot of those conversations. But my partner Barry and I, we keep sending them books, because that's the one thing my mom does believe in, is education. And so whenever we start talking about something and I feel like we're on totally separate pages, she's like, well, you need to read more about this. And I'm like, but you need to read more about, the history of America, and civil rights and all. So we've been sending these books, but because she doesn't read English, we've done like this deep dive into, like, getting like James Baldwin translated into Mandarin, and like the best translation of that.
Wow.
So it's been fun to find those books, and send it to her,
That's
and
great.
then have some conversations, and including like Ta-Nehisi Coates. But I think that the thing that it made me realize in doing research about, of like reading, is a lot of their ignorance actually does come from the fact that there are no translations into Chinese of a lot of these books. They're not the normal market.
Yeah.
And so it's been interesting to see like which books are translated into Chinese and which ones are not.
That's so interesting. That's so interesting to just think about. Like, um, there's no kind of like way to even talk about some of these issues like that. I've always been amazed by how, like, there's certain words in the Arabic language that don't that there are no words to encompass like the how certain American emotions feel, and I know it's vice versa, but I think that that's often like a split my mom and I have, because I'm like, there's no like word to like encompass what a lot of this stuff is, and I think that can like further the divide I have with her. um
Mhm.
but but you said something, or like when we started, about how like something you have difficulty doing is celebrating. What was it? Celebrating like the little things, the little moments. Is that something like? Is that what you said? I don't know if I have that right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something I talk about with friends a lot and remind each other, because I
Mhm.
find that, so many of my friends come from backgrounds that, really value like pushing ahead and being resilient, and like just keep going and keep fighting, and not so much on like enjoying the moment and just being present and celebrating those small achievements, which sometimes means like, it's good in a way because it keeps you ambitious. The benchmark is always moving, right? The goalpost. Um, but it can also just mean you're never happy. Like you're never really like relishing your own accomplishments, or relishing the moment, enjoying where you are. You're always trying to get to that next place. So, yeah, that is something that I'm trying to just do more of, is like celebrating this, even the smaller milestones.
Mhm.
But yeah, again, it's just so tough with that's like a challenge, because it's like, all right, cocktails. I mean, there's only so many ways you can celebrate in quarantine the milestones.
I know what you mean. I feel like what you're talking about is very much connected to how I have, and I still have this, like, an inability to define myself as an artist. I think that means I can't rest because I'm not yet an artist, and I think that has really held me back in a lot of ways. It's like it's an inability to rest in that label. Like, I just
Mm.
can't, like, wear it in some sense. Like, I always feel like I'm outside of it, and there's a host of reasons for that are external and also internal. But I'm just I think those two are connected, you know?
Well, and I'm sure it's especially Hollywood, especially the film industry. There's this I feel like in the visual arts, if you've done an exhibition and you are an artist, you've created work. But there's this saying in Hollywood that's like you're as good as the last thing that you made. Um,
Oof.
so
Yeah.
there is like this pressure of like one hit wonder. Am I the imposter syndrome? Like what's the next thing? Is it gonna be as good? All of that. And I think it makes it challenging to just be like, well, maybe I don't make something for 7, 8 years. Maybe I go and, do ceramics or do something else for a while so that I can fill back up before I go. I think this sense of like constantly having to is really dangerous.
I agree with that because I think so much, like, from what I can tell, like, in your work, and I feel like I have this too, is that, like, our work is sort of based in vulnerability and opening up, and that doesn't happen fast. Knowing what's inside you and knowing, like, the getting into, like, the scary truths of who we are and the stuff maybe we're shameful about, like, that's stuff that comes in the work, and it doesn't happen every year. These new realizations don't just, like, come about, and I think personal work takes time, you know?
Absolutely.
Which is kind of like a question I was wondering about, because in the farewell, like, there is that vulnerability, and I wonder, like, when you're writing now or when you're doing work now, like, are there things you do to tap into vulnerability, and, like, what does vulnerability, like, feel like for you? Like, when do you know it's happening?
Feels so similar to like a therapy session. I feel like I feel like my friends and I were just talking about this. I try to bring it all the time, which is an exercise, and sometimes I forget, but it's almost like it's almost like a muscle, that you have to remember to use. And it's sort of like, okay, if I constantly remember to like hold my back straight, like maybe my body will learn that, and then I don't even have to think about it. And so then it becomes a habit. And I think of vulnerability in the same way that I try to do it with the coffee shop person, with with strangers on the street, instead of like assuming things, or I try to approach things with an openness and with to people and situations, um which is also what it's making the pandemic hard, because it's hard to exercise vulnerability when you're not seeing people, you're not out in the world, um
Oh, so true.
and so and I miss that. I miss like those little interactions with strangers where I I don't even realize I'm doing it, but I'm testing my own ability to be open and vulnerable, to make a joke, to be kind, to ask how someone's day is, and they might give you a response that you weren't expecting, and you're like, "Oh," and you realize maybe your own prejudices. Maybe you assume something, and then that person's, and you're like, "Oh, that's not who I thought that." All of those things feel a life. And when you just up every day and you don't have that, it's sort of like does the tree, what's that expression, does the tree make the sound if like there's nobody around to hear it in the forest,
Exactly.
right? And it's like,
Yeah.
well, who are you as a person, as an artist, when you're not in relation to the world? And I
Yes.
guess the sense of the world is changing, right? Like our world is changing. Maybe your world is your family, your relationship. It's also a lot of pressure to put on just a few select people.
It is also, and I think you do this too, but I think a lot of my creativity comes from being an observer, just sort of watching things that happen on the bus, or watching an interaction. And it's like ephemeral stuff that you don't even realize is why it's like the way the light hits, or the way it's just so many things happen that kind of tell you this is a moment to document, and a moment that might feel fruitful. Um, and it's so true. It's hard to have them because I think, one, people are wearing masks or they're not wearing them, and that's aggravating too, for me personally. But it's just harder, it's hard. I think it's been yeah, I'm someone, because I started out in journalism and I'm still in journalism. I'm so like hearing people's stories. And I know you did
Mhm.
that for a time when, when you were like videotaping for, like, these lawyers, and just getting these stories from people about like how they're doing. It's a part of the work. And I think when you can't go into people, so you can't have that, it is, I don't know, I'm wrestling with it. When I do
Yeah,
see people, like, we've had some people come over, and they're also doing what we're doing. I feel so good after I've seen people. Like, I'm like, "Oh my
yeah,
god, we saw people."
yeah.
But
Same, same. I was gonna ask
it's
you because, you know, I think we talked a little bit about it before, but um, I think my work completely changed after doing This American Life. Like telling that story through a journalistic format has completely shifted my entire process, how I approach my storytelling. And I can talk more about that, but I'm curious, from all of the years as a producer and working in nonfiction and journalism, how does that influence the way you tell narrative stories?
That's a great question. I think it really, because we edit the interviews. The interviews are typically 90 minutes, and we cut them down to sometimes anywhere between, 20 to 43 minutes or so. I think what I've learned is, what the essential is. What is the essential in every answer? And obviously I'm working with, one of the best in the business, and she asks really essential questions. But I think for me, it's given me the sense that, what is this? Every question, I sort of see a fresh air interview as a parabola, and the parabola is the story of the interview, right? It's like, here we go, we begin, you find out who they are, and as each question continues, you go deeper and further, and that's the ideal interview, right? And so I think with filmmaking and with writing, I really try to infuse that into what I do, into how I write. And I try to incorporate all the tools that we have. We have editing, we have sound. I try to work all of that so that we go deeper and further.
Mhm.
Because I think if an interview has an arc, like everything has an arc, there's a story in everything. And I just try to find that, in 90 minutes of tape, the same way I try to understand why I'm writing this scene, is like, is this scene building on the previous moment? And how is it building? You know? Um, which is actually why, a question I had for you, and I grabbed a couple stills from the farewell, because in our previous conversation, we had actually talked about this. And I thought it was it's so interesting, is that a conversation, something you do often with your editor, is your editor says, how long should this frame be? And he makes you defend each frame, you know? And there's an edit in the farewell that I was like, oh, I want to know what the story is there, because as an editor, I'm like, in radio, obviously, I edit my films too. I had an editor for Namour, but I think about like the residue of an edit, and what we want to trail from scene to scene. I think that's a really big tool we have. And
Mhm.
if we could just look at this shot from your movie, if we can, I don't know who I can say, if we can look at shot number 1 that I selected. Here we are. Um, this is a scene where Billy is speaking with her father and her uncle, and to me, this is really like the heart of the scene of the movie. We're really getting like the dilemma, like, should she tell? Should she not? Are they going to tell? Or are they not? And her uncle and her father really kind of delineate like, this is why we don't do this. We don't say anything to grandma to Nina, because we have to bear the emotional burden, and that's what we do. This is the collective culture. Like that's our job. And before we get into the edit, the question I had for you is, did you write this scene to be in the dark? Did you write it that way?
Yes.
Can you tell me why?
Yeah, I did. I think I wrote it to be in the dark. I'm trying to remember because it was so long ago. Um, because the whole movie's about secrets, and the father smoking is a secret. He's not speaking up directly to his older brother and saying, actually, I'm more American than you think. And so he says it in a
Mhm.
he's a little more clandestine about even like his own feelings and how torn he is, and whether he maybe agrees more with Billy than he's willing to admit. So for all of those reasons, the smoking in secret, Billy is always like me with my father. I'm always like, stop smoking. He's like, I'm not smoking, but he's always smoking secretly. So yeah, that was the reason. I just thought I would put them in like some dark corner, where Billy discovers them, because feel like that's taken from my life. I'm constantly trying to, whenever my dad's missing, I'm like, is he smoking? Where is he? And I'm trying to find him.
I just thought it was it's such a tonal change in the film. It's such a nice change of pace. And it's just textural stuff that makes the film get to that deeper level, and I think of things in that parabola, and I feel like the darkness is really something that gets us into the secrets, what you're talking about. How did you choose this frame and this space? Like, if you don't mind, like, just how did that come about? Because I see the number 9 and I was like, is that significant at all to see that? Like, but what's how did this space come about?
Well, this is a real hotel. We scouted a ton of hotels, and this was one of my favorite locations because not only did it have this space, which we found, it's a real like kind of cafeteria canteen space. Everything in this scene is real. Like the hotel, it's none of it. Everything was shot on location because it's a super low budget independent film, and sometimes the stuff, again, speaking of the stuff that you find in real life, is so much more textural and so much more interesting than anything you can make up. But I think the challenge is that you just can't give up. We looked at so many hotels and we kept saying no, 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 to the point where the rest of the crew was getting frustrated. They're like, nothing's going to make you happy. We've already looked at this many options, but you just have to keep going until the one. And that's what this was. We found this hotel. The bedrooms are all in the same building. So we spent 4 days shooting here, and the light outside the window, or it was just all perfect, and we barely just enhanced it. We leaned into what was existing rather than sort of like trying to shift it in any way.
I think that, yeah, that collision you're talking about of like the production meeting what's in your head, what you've written on the page is really the beauty of filmmaking for me. I've been so humbled by what reality has provided when I'm trying to control it so much. And I have found that, like, because money is often an issue for us, those constraints have really just brought about, they just made me dig so deep, they've made me dig really deep. I'm thinking of one instance, with Namour, like I'd written these scenes in like an Arabic supermarket, and I just could not get a supermarket. We could not afford it at all. And I really just took that moment and said, what do I have? Like, what do I have? Like, I'm so focused on what I don't have, but what do I have? And I think that's something like it's hard to do, right? Because we're just thinking about like, we come from a place of like deprivation. What do I not have? And, I thought about, my dad's medical store, and he, small business owner, and he just had this store, and I thought, I'm going to rewrite these scenes for that. And the film took on a different hue, because all of a sudden it's about, it's about a grandmother who's, getting older and not doing well, but it's the medical store kind of brought that in a different color. All of a sudden you're seeing it in a different way. It's sort of hitting that note a little differently now. And it's like, it's so obvious to me now, but I didn't think about it, You just don't think
Yeah,
about
that's
what you
so
have.
beautiful. It's so beautiful because, it is a metaphor for life, right? Being grateful for what you have. And that's particularly true when you're in the pandemic. And you think about all the varied experiences that people are having with the lockdown and the virus itself, that you think about what you have. And so it's hard to be frustrated when you go, okay, I'm healthy, I have my health, I have blah, blah, blah. And so, yeah, you can totally bring that philosophy into filmmaking. And it's what I love about independent filmmaking that I'm scared to lose, because so when you get
Mhm.
to a studio level, a budget level, where the studio's appetite for risk is very, very, very low. So they want as much as possible. And for me, it's not about like, for me, it's about the exploration. It's about the journey. It's not just like, okay, this is the idea that I have in my head and it has to be exactly like that. Cause I don't think that I'm growing if I approach my work that way. I want to interact with this thing and this life force in a way, and it teaches you things as well as you're scouting. And so often, if you can adapt to what do I have, and you know what you want to say, you end up making a much more, like, the scene ends up being better, the it becomes simpler, because maybe you had like 4 pages of dialogue scripted, and then a storm is coming and you can't get all of that out. You don't have time to shoot that. And so if all you're doing is focusing on, oh my God, the storm, the movie's ruined, I'm not going to get the scene, then what you're not doing is going, you know what? I don't need them to talk. Maybe, you know what? Like, I can adapt and I can just have the two of them hug, and maybe when it rains, it'll be even more beautiful because it rains and then they have to run inside, whatever it is that you like. So many things in The Farewell was that way too. So, like, someone recently said, oh, I love that scene with the umbrellas, like it just seemed so perfectly crafted. I was like, no, that was last minute. It started
Mm.
to trickle and they were like, I think it's gonna rain. And I was like, oh no, what are we gonna do? Well, I've seen people in the city have these beautiful pastel colors. Let's go get some of those umbrellas. And that's what, and we like that whole scene now becomes about these pastel umbrellas. And then the funny thing is, we couldn't get pastel umbrellas. Like, all they were selling were just these, like, like neutral tone, plaid, whatever colors. And our assistants brought those back, and we were like, no, but like, how come people have these pink and blue? So then we're like 5 minutes away from shooting, and I said, all right, that guy has a pink umbrella. Go and see if you can give him some cash and trade this plaid one for his pink one. And so
I love
we
it.
got like 3, and we were like, well, now we have 3. We got to have them all. They got to match. So we just kept like doing that until we had enough colors for the scene.
Beautiful.
And
Oh,
it's
that's
like, and
beautiful.
I think that spirit, everybody got so like invigorated too by sort of just walking up to strangers, trying to, haggle their umbrella from them. And that energy is totally in the comedy of it. People being a little bit like, it's very like Jacques Tati inspired.
Totally.
So I think,
Totally. Oh, I love
that,
that.
yeah.
It makes me think of like just the beauty of production, and if and when we return to life, it just, that story just makes me think of like, that's really what filmmaking is. It's that, like, just that collision of like, we can't do this, what can we do, these are now it's raining, like, that's it. It's finding an answer in all of that, and it's beautiful, and like, and that's forever in your movie, and like, I love hearing that. It just helps to hear that.
Well,
But in
and
terms of like,
it's a good
yeah,
reminder.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna
It's a
say,
good
because
reminder.
I've actually been really scared of going back into production where, under all of the COVID protocols, and it's like, all right, maybe we can get on back on set, but outside of set, you have to quarantine. You're not allowed to go to restaurants. Like whatever all of those rules are, I'm scared of that because being part of the city, being part of the world, getting lost, like, and then going, oh my God, I love that sign. Can we put that sign in our scene? Or can we, like, so much of that is part of my process. Um, like if you read the script and then the original shooting script and then watch the movie, like it's so much of it is inspired by my scouting process, prepping and living in a particular city, and bringing those influences in, that I'm worried with the protocols that I won't be able to do that, and then is it still worth it to push forward and shoot under those restrictions?
That's a really good question. I don't know, because I just think, yeah, so much of what we do is about just like staying in the moment and being open. Um, and it's going to be very hard to do that. It's just going to be so hard to do that. Are you going to be going into production on anything soon? Is that coming up for you,
Well, we're
or not?
exploring, shooting this series, Expats, in Hong Kong, and they are much more advanced than we are, but they still, and it's probably because they have all of these protocols. So we're trying to figure out how to do it. So we'll see.
That's so hard.
It's still up in the air. Yeah.
Wow. My gosh. Well, once something that you said, and I think I was wondering about this too for you, is like, Billy in the film, she gets these she gets a rejection letter from the Guggenheim Foundation, and I thought Lulu's probably had her share of rejection letters, like me. I think it's fair to say that. And I just wonder, like, you've had such a wonderful, deserved, tremendous success with the farewell. Like, do you look at, I don't know, I felt so defined at some point by the rejection letters. I was like, well, clearly there are so many of these. They must be accurate, like they must be telling me something. And if I were dating and I got this many rejections, I would stop dating. Like, I would think there's something very wrong with me. But in filmmaking, it's like part of the thing, and I'm just wondering if if you've been reflecting on that period at all, and um
Oh,
it just
every day. I
yeah.
mean, and I think part of it reflecting because I'm so connected to that period between my first feature, Posthumous, having again pushed this giant boulder up the hill and then just waiting for the rewards to come in and then they don't. And then it's like, oh, wait, I got to do this again. Like starting with nothing, I didn't even have representation after that film. So there's a part of me that's like, I could go back to that at any point. And I think that's healthy. And it's also probably unhealthy at the same time. But the Guggenheim was actually the movie version of my Sundance rejections because I like submitted to
Yeah,
Sundance to the labs and everything like every single year. Because be all for independent filmmakers, right? To be in those labs, to premiere at those festivals. and became a joke between me and my other filmmaker. It was like cool, the crowd of cool kids that I'll never belong to. And I already have that as a Chinese immigrant kid. I was like never like part of the cool group. Um, and so like I created this whole story about it, about what Sundance represented and how it's going to be on the outside. But then, I ended up doing the Film 2 Lab as you're doing, or as you did.
Yeah.
And then the film premiered at Sundance. And then a friend asked me, she was like, "Do you feel like you've now joined that group?" And I was like, "No, I still feel very uncool." Like, so
I
I'm
know.
just like, it just makes me realize maybe they're all uncool like me. I don't feel any different. So yeah, but I think the failure is really important. And and a slight bit of like fear and the desire. Like if I talk about I'm doing a project, that's not like being a little scared that you're gonna fail is actually the sign that you're on the right path.
I agree. I'm so glad to hear you say this about Sundance, because I too, and I think I still have some of that of like, I'm not in that group and I'm not this. And I think, you know, um, in therapy, I've discovered she's like, this is a running theme for you. And I'm like, yeah, I guess it is. I just feel like there's this like group I'm not in and I'm always out and I need to work on something. And but at the same time, I think it's also allowed me to be a very thoughtful artist, because I observe. I spend a lot of time kind of just watching, and finding stories. So it's sort of a double-edged thing. One other thing I think that you're onto is like that fear of failure. I'm starting to sort of see it as a compass, and like that's like the way to go. If you're really afraid of it, like I even had that with becoming a parent. Like I was so scared, of just what it would be. And it's intense and it is scary, but like I think that's when I knew I had to do it. I know that makes no sense maybe, but 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 I just think like if I'm afraid, I should do it. And so far, thank God, it's been okay. But yeah, it's a weird thing. You kind of have to reverse. You have to push past the initial emotions of it. Um, so wait 1 second. I think you're still for me. Oh wait, now I see you. Now I see you. You got still for 1 second.
Yeah, we had a little hiccup.
Yeah. Oh, we have a question. Do you see it?
I do. Should I read the
You
question?
want to read it? Yeah, go for it.
Okay. The question is, I was thinking about millennials and COVID and how we've all been forced online. Does the necessity for speed and rapid movement have the potential to change our patience with cinema, especially since you were all talking about taking your time? What does it mean to them as feature narrative film? Oh, I guess to us as feature narrative filmmakers, that it's looking more and more like we're going virtual. Interesting question. It's an interesting question because I had this very special, like, theatrical release last year, 2019, where I talked so much on the press, the press, whatever you call it, like trip, journey. My
Yeah.
brain, the press
Circuit? Yeah, no, I know it.
right?
I'm there.
Why? Um, where I talked a lot about why I chose A24 rather than a streaming platform, and how important it was for me to bring community together. And I traveled from city to city, and I saw the film gain little by little. Like it was literally like I was traveling, nobody really knew me or knew the film. And then like a week later, I'd travel to another city, and like the number of people who wanted to come up and talk to me after the film got bigger and bigger. And there was like one city, I think San Francisco or somewhere, where there's a lot of Asian Americans, where I got like hounded, and I was like, what is going on? Like it's like this thing, it just becomes bigger but you build it from the ground up, and that's what was so beautiful. And to be in those spaces and connect with people face to face. And I don't think that my film would have had that same path if I had gone with a digital platform. Um, and now this year, so many filmmakers are not having that opportunity at a film to do that. So their options, their choices look very different. And um, we have to make the best of it. That's all that we can do. Like, and it's a really difficult decision. Do you hold the film or until like things reopen, or do you find a way to release it? And I just hope that we can still continue to find those kinds of communities online. But for me, like, I'm very old school. I get really, it's too much, like the Zoom and all of that. It's so much exhausting for me, and I don't feel the energy of people. So I don't think that really answers the question. But
Well,
what
no,
do you
but
think,
I
Heidi?
think I know, I think I'm on the same page as you. At the same time, I know that like we're all relying on stories and entertainment more than ever, it's something we're all taking comfort in at night or just throughout the day. And I think fortunately, like so much of what I love about movie making is about like the communal experience. And I think what you're talking about is like building that love for the movie from the ground up. Like it's just not going to happen right now. It's a very different kind of way of getting um just feeling community. It's just different, and I think we're figuring it out. So I don't know if there is an answer to this. I think that just things are at a standstill and they will change again, but I don't know if there's an answer at this point. I think we have a couple more here. Do you want me to read the next one? It says,
Yeah, do
"What are
the
you
next.
doing as okay? What are you doing as artists to prevent the cultural erasure of other women of color filmmakers and cultural workers? Do you notice how you are treated differently than women of African, Latinx heritage in the world of film?" Hmm.
Do you
Um,
wanna?
sure, I'll take that. I don't know if I'm treated differently. I It's hard to sort of say that in general, but I will say, it I think the culture of filmmaking is that it is sort of, it has been a homogenous color, and it is changing, and I think we're part of that change. So I think it's shifting slowly and but surely. And I've shadowed Black female filmmakers who are on sets, and the treatment has been different. I will say that, and it's not everybody was respecting the director in charge. I can't say exactly why. I have suspicions. I think we all do. But as far as what I'm doing to prevent the cultural erasure and cultural workers, I do hiring. I hire the people who work on my films, and they look like the world I know. And I think someone brought attention, and of course this is what we're talking about when we talk about biases. I guess I had this bias, but someone noticed that all the heads of the departments on my film were women, and I had not even thought about it. And I think that's just something like you're just opening it up, and I don't think that's a bias. It's just, if you have more people in charge, I liked what they had to say and I hired them. So Lulu, do you want to field that one? Or
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm part of a group of friends who are all women of color. Um, three of three of them are Black, and we talk a lot about the differences in treatment, and we talk a lot about the ways in which we can change the landscape. And is it better to sort of work your way in through, for lack of a better word, assimilation and get a seat at the table, or do we create our own table? And we go back and forth a lot because I think that both are important. They go hand in hand. Um, I never want to erase the people before me, who came before me, who had no choice but to enter through assimilation because they didn't have enough clout, they didn't have enough numbers to create their own table. And so I think it took those people to, enter and assimilate and then, have a seat to now like build off of that, where many of us are able to create our own tables. Like I don't know if answers the culture erasure question, but one thing that I think is really important, because there is a lot more openness to like different stories that we haven't seen before. And when my friends get approached to make those films, I ask right away to see their deals. And one of the things I say, like, let's talk about numbers, let's talk about money. What I got. This is what this white man got on a similar project with a similar studio, and I think it's really important to be transparent about that stuff, because that is part of, how we, have equality, right? Like, and how we continue to build our table is when people get paid and have comps to discuss. And I think, our industry has not historically been very transparent about those things. Um, and so we talk a lot about comps a lot, where I say, okay, like when you're not getting paid X amount for an acquisition by this company, is it because you're a Black woman? Is it because it's a Black film? Or is it just that this studio doesn't pay that much? Right. And it's difficult to like navigate that and know. And so I'm like, all right, well, then talk to your agent, get all of the comps way for this film and that film and that film. And so I think those are things we all have to continue to be transparent with each other about.
I think that's such a smart thing to do, because I think a lot of times the industry is sort of relying on us to keep quiet and sort of just be happy with what we have. And I think if we all know how everyone's doing, and I have a group of women as well. Maybe we should combine groups. I have a feeling some of the women are in your group too, though. But I think we talk about all of it, opportunities and all of that. And I think it's so important. I think it just helps everyone feel like we're all being treated the same. Do you want to take the next question?
Yes. Your films are so beautiful, but also exist in this daily, mundane, sometimes sad or boring landscape. How do you choose to aestheticize the quotidian in some exquisite ways? What does this do for your characters and storyline?
Well, I think for me, yeah, that is the job, right? Is that we're trying to kind of, I mean, at least for me, I was trying to film a guy who's really stuck in his life and try to make that beautiful. And I think you have to just use all of the tools that we've been given. We have sound, we have color, we have editing, and we just try to tap into how to layer those emotions, layer the emotion of what the scene feels like into all of these tools that we have. And it could be something simple as the prop, or they're like the pillowcase that they're sleeping on, but all of that is just part of the kind of way of giving a feeling. I think cinema, the cinema I love, is really about delivering a feeling, more so than anything else. It's like transporting you to a feeling. And I think that's I don't know if I'm answering the question, but I think I try to kind of understand, like I've always, Francis Ford Coppola said this, but he really tries to have like a word for every one, so to whittle down like the film or the script that he's working on down to one word. And then that one word can inform everything. So, on The Conversation, the word for him was privacy. And so when the costume people came up to him and said, should Gene Hackman wear this coat or a see-through coat? He went back to that word, privacy, and he decided it would be a see-through coat, because then he would feel vulnerable and exposed. It's like we're working in the language of the subconscious, of the unconscious. And I think having that word for me is really helpful when I have to kind of deal with all of the department questions, which, is part of our job. So
Absolutely. I completely agree. You talk about cinema conveying feeling. I think connected to feeling is also atmosphere, right? Is like the mood of it all, like, um, which we again use sound and images. But I think it's about not being, for me, anyways. It's about not being on the nose. It's about not like thinking about things as from a plot perspective. And so if you're thinking about the like, and how do I relate to the pandemic, I try to think in metaphors. What are the questions that this brings up? What are the feelings that it brings up? Is it about loneliness? Is it, like you said, the word, right? Is it isolation? Is it reassessment? So many people are reassessing their lives. I just thought of this great idea for, I don't know if it's a great idea. I don't want to like pat myself on the back, but like that's related to COVID. Because before this, I was like, I don't ever want to see a movie about COVID. Like we're all living it. Like it's not interesting. But I have a friend who's stuck in Mexico, and his wife and his kids are stuck in Brussels. And because of, for whatever reasons, the regulations, he can't fly back in. So he's just been stuck here for months. And there's another woman who's American and who lives in Mexico, has also been stuck. And he starts to have feelings for this woman. And I'm like, and it's like, in normal circumstances, he would just fly back to his family. He loves his family. There's like, it's not like he has any issues with his wife, but
right.
you're stuck in this place for such a long
Yeah.
energy, and you do, right? It's almost lives. So I just,
Wow.
there's so, when you start thinking that way, it's like there's endless possibilities.
Yeah. Oh my God. So that's insane. No, I hear that. Oh my goodness. Here we have some more questions. Did you have permission to become artists from your immigrant parents? um,
So what do you mean by
I don't know.
permission?
I know. I will admit to keeping things from my parents for a while. I just wasn't sure how it would go down. So I don't know if I had permission, but I think I reached a certain point where I felt like this was all or nothing. And then by that point I pretty much had their backing, but I think they were still worried. And I don't blame them. It's their parents. I get it now. I kind of get it now. How about you, Lulu? Oh wait.
You hear me? Did I freeze?
Oh, now I can hear you. Yes, you froze for a moment. I got you.
Okay, good. I think it's so hard, but i- if you listen to your parents and their fears, you know like the thing that you're desiring to be an artist, that the creative drive that you have, it's never going to go away. And it's just, if you wait 10 years, 20 years, and you follow their voice instead of your voice, that voice of like needing you to be creative and your instinct is just going to get louder and louder as you get older and older. And so I think for me, like, there was a part of me that knew that, and I was like, I just have to stay on this path. Because if I leave and do the other thing, I'm just gonna have a midlife crisis and come back later.
Yeah.
I might have a family by then, and you have certain comforts that you're used to. You might have a mortgage to pay at that point. So, like, even when I turned 30, I just kept convincing myself that I was still like very, very young and could live very, very minimally and have very little overhead and keep myself as free and as young as possible. Because that's for me, not for everyone necessarily, but for me, the easiest way. So I don't know if this is a younger person, older person, but I'm assuming if they're asking about parents and the pressure, that they're probably on the younger side. Because, like, they're going to get older, you're going to get older, and the person you're going to have to look at every day is yourself.
That's very true. Very, very true. Let's see.
Aside from the financial, should I read this one? Aside from the financial aspect, do you feel like there's a discrepancy with the amount of creative control or ability to negotiate that creative control when discussing projects that involve a greater focus on stories about POC? Absolutely.
Do you want to start
Because
with that?
I think it's about. I don't think it's always intentional. From the side of producers are a lot more averse to risk because they're responsible for and names, and there's egos involved, what have you. So that's a blanket thing, like regardless of who you are. But if your story involves subtitles, a culture, a language that they don't necessarily understand, they don't necessarily relate to, yeah, it's going to take a lot more navigation and negotiation to convince them that this is going to be universal, this is going to be relatable, and that translates to, yes, you're going to make your money back. So I'm sure, we've all dealt with that. And I think the bigger you get, the probably more you have to deal with it just because there's more money involved. So that's why I think, this when you're starting out, the smaller you can make your early projects, the better, because you're going to have a lot more creative control that way.
I think that's so true. And I also think, like, and I'm sure you face this. It's like when you can't, a lot of times these people want to see films that look like what you're going to make. Like they just want to know, like, what's this going to be like? Is it going to be like this? And I don't know what the example would have been for The Farewell. Like there's no kind of studio movie that you could have given them that said, this is what this is going to be. And by the way, it's an American movie and it's mostly in subtitles. Like you're shifting culture. And I think that like, that's what this is about. And I think shifting culture, yeah, it gets uncomfortable. I mean, I had the same experience when people were asking me to make my movie about, terrorism, and just like to find some identifiable theme that Middle Easterners could occupy. And I just thought, this is not an identifiable theme to a lot of Middle Easterners, so you just have to, it's fun. It's not like, oh my God, this is, I have to like fight this out. It's like, this is the business. Like you just have to kind of keep your freedom by keeping it simple, as Lulu said. But know that they're always going to be these things. They're just always going to keep coming at you. And yeah, they just will. So here's the next one. Can we speak to where we found the moxie to pursue artistic pursuits? When I imagine,
we already answered that.
Oh, sorry. Oh, whoops. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. Okay. Do you think that your future movies and others in particular will have to visually acknowledge the COVID distancing protocols?
I think it's related to the story. Like I think it just, like, I think in the past we could do like modern present day, and it could be like within 10 years, right? Like it wouldn't matter because it all looks the same. I think now every post COVID, during COVID, or like you have to identify, like anything pre-COVID is now a period piece because
Exactly.
it exists. It's a sport, right? It exists in a world pre-pandemic. So the concerns of your characters are going to be very different. The way that people think, the way that your characters talk and think are going to be completely different during the pandemic and post-pandemic, even when this is all over. Which, like, I don't know how I'm even going to write post, and none of us know what that's going to be like yet. So it's definitely forced me to reassess existing projects that I've already set up, because I set it up pre-COVID, and they were based on themes that I cared very much about and I thought other people would care about. But now in a pandemic world, I'm like, nobody's going to care because they already know that industry, what's going to happen to that industry. Like, so why are they going to care what happened to it pre-pandemic?
Mhm.
Because all of the concerns of your characters almost seem frivolous because we know what
Mhm.
happened to them. And so I had to really talk to my producers and go, what do we do here? Because I can't make the same show. And so
Yeah.
can I lean into the idea that what the characters are thinking about is frivolous? Like, you know what I'm saying? It's like we really almost have to lean in and go, okay, this is X number of months before the pandemic hit, before the lockdown. We know what's going to happen to these people, but they don't. So I'm using the timeline of COVID as almost like an apocalyptic sort of ticking clock
So interesting.
where
Yeah.
it's still the same story, but now there's just this undertow of they're thinking, I'm going to travel, I'm going to do this. And in the next 2 years, this is going to happen. And, I put all these little clues of what the date is and what's happening and the news in the background where you're just like, dun, 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 little do you know, all the best laid plans, whatever that phrase is, right? And so I built that as part of the tension of the season. So I think that, for other people, it just depends on what the story is.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that there's a scenario where, I think I read this somewhere that they said, the Spanish flu, like there's no literature about it because people just were so tired of it and they didn't want to think about it. Do you think that we're going to have that now where people are just going to be so over it that they're just not going to want to have stories about it? Or do you think we're going to have to really incorporate this into the time we're in, you know?
I think, anything that's well done is going to be relatable. So I think, again, like what I was saying earlier is I don't want to watch a film about, if someone was like, this is a show about COVID, would like I wouldn't, but that's also like saying this is a movie about World War II. Like, what about World War II? What about COVID? It's about what it's about rather than the thing itself. Like, you can use COVID, you can use anything as the backdrop, but is it about
Yeah.
love? Is it about what, yeah,
Yeah.
whatever the themes
No,
are.
it's so interesting to think about how you can incorporate this into your writing. It's like in the future of it. I'm eager to see what happens. I'm sure it will be great. Is that, oh, it looks like, oh, we went over. I think that's it. Yeah.
Oh, that was our last.
I know. I think
Well,
so.
that was so fast.
That was very fast. I was sort of like, huh? This was
I know
lovely. I just feel
I
like
have so many other questions for you, Heidi. I had
I
so
know
many other
I
questions,
had a
but we'll have
question
to.
for you too, and I didn't even finish what I was saying about the editing. We'll talk about it later, but yes, hopefully sometime soon. But yes, thank you for chatting. It was so good to check in with you again. And yeah, that's great.
You too.
Um,
Thank you so much.
Yes. Good
Thanks,
luck with
everyone.
everything, and we'll be watching. Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you, BlackStar. Thank you, everybody.